Welcome to BNEWS Special Report, 2021 Year in Review, a year to forget. My guest is Paul Sagarino, Burlington's Town Administrator. Welcome, Paul. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Phil. It's hard to believe it's only been a year since we did the last one.
Well, it was yes, I know, and the older I get, the quicker they seem to be in between. 2021, a year to forget for both the world, the nation, the state, and Burlington, and Paul Sagarino in particular as well.
Absolutely.
Just briefly give us how you're feeling. You had a bad bout with COVID.
Yeah, I had a really bad bout. In September, I came down with COVID. I think the doctors told me it was kind of like hitting the lottery, given my age and my health and my vaccination, the fact that I was vaccinated. So joined the group of folks that lives were saved by Leahy. They saved my life 100%, and it was a traumatic experience, but I'm starting to feel better now, and about at 85%. So I'm
back in your feet,
starting to feel really good.
Back in the saddle.
Absolutely.
Okay, 2021. We'll talk about COVID and all the impacts that it had, but let's start with water. We have a number of things going on in water. First of all is the MWRA connection. Bring us up to speed of what the plan is there. We have a temporary connection, then a larger connection, and then a full connection. So where are those at this point?
Okay, so the temporary connection's been in place, and we've been drawing water on that for almost 2 years now. And
that's a million gallons?
That's a million gallons a day up at Adams Street through Lexington. The next big chunk of the project is scheduled to begin. We have all of our approvals, and that is the construction of a line from about the intersection of Maple Street in Lexington to Adams Street, and that's a major line, and that will allow us to take in approximately 3.5 million gallons a day to get to that point. And the final phase of the project is to extend that line from the Turnpike and Adams Street up until approximately the area of Burlington Mall Road. And once we can finish that last connection there, we'll be able to pull 6.5 million gallons a day, if necessary, the entire town's water usage on a hot summer day. So.
Okay, so what is our average daily consumption and peak consumption of water in the town?
Don't hold me to this, but it's something along the lines of about 2.5 to 3 million gallons a day in the winter, and upwards of 5 to 5.5 million in the summer when everybody's watering, and it's we go through a real hot spell.
Okay, let's go through the funding sources that have been appropriated at this point. We did the first 2 years ago, the first connection. Bring us up to speed on the overall dollars and where that money's coming from.
I believe at the beginning, Phil, is approximately a $27 million project. Town meeting gave us the full appropriation on that. As you know, subsequent to that, we've worked hard to try to find alternative sources to help us pay for this project, and we've been really successful. Last year, we received a $3.5 million grant from the State Economic Development Office, MassWorks grant towards the project. Again, the state considers us to be a very good partner in job creation and housing creation.
And tax income.
And tax income. But they know that when they invest in us, that we really provide the jobs in return, so that they know that we're a good place for them to invest their money. So that was the first bit of good news on that. Subsequent to that, we were able to negotiate with the Nordblom company. They wanted to make a contribution to help us with the water supply. And again, that was probably another $4 million paid out to us over the next 20 years. And just this past fall, we were able to receive the good news that we received another $1 million from the state towards the project. And that was specifically towards the part of the line that goes from Adams to Mall Road. So if you consider those cash inflows, as well as the fact that the MWRA also contributed quite a bit in building a chunk of our line, because it was a benefit to their entire system as a whole. So they actually contributed to the project as well.
Now, we'll be going from a fully productive in-house water supply to ultimately probably a monolithic water supply. What impact has it had on water rates, and how will that bond issue be paid off over the period of time necessary to take care of it?
Well, Phil, when we proposed the project, and we haven't wavered from this, we anticipated that the impact on the average residential water user would be $10 on an annual basis over 10 years. So over 10 years, $100 to the average water user in town. And we haven't wavered from that, and I think that by bringing in some of these outside sources of funding, we'll be able to do better than that. But that was the plan that we proposed to town meeting in the beginning, and we're still on track to have that be the maximum exposure for the residents there.
What did it cost us to become a full member of the MWRA, and what of their debt burden are we taking on?
It's approximately $5 million based upon how much water you want to buy in for. So I believe our payment to the MWRA, which is included in this project, is approximately $10 million to get the full amount of daily use of water that we want over time. Obviously, we're not ready for the full amount of water now, so that'll be phased in over time. But we have paid for the first allotment to allow us to pull money as an actual MWRA member unit.
Right, so that's included in the debt schedule over the period of time.
It's all included in the cost of the project, so
And
there's
it
no
was
additional from what we said originally.
Somewhat fortuitous that it occurred last year, basically the bond issue, because of municipal borrowing rates.
Well, we've had outstanding municipal borrowing rates very, very low for years now. It's one of these things where every time we sit down to borrow, it's we're never going to do better than this until next year when we do better than that.
Right.
So as you know, it's been very favorable times for us to borrow, and over the course of time that will save the taxpayers a lot of money.
So we're talking somewhere in the 2.5% over that period of
Yeah,
time?
yeah, probably over the course of the time, and you know they structure them differently with different coupon rates and whatnot, but the actual cost of the deal.
Now, we had a double whammy on the water with the introduction of PFAS, which none of us had any idea what that is. And apparently the state arbitrarily has instituted a PFAS level in the water supply down to 20 parts per trillion, which the EPA, the federal EPA, is 70 parts per trillion. Mm-hmm. What impact has that had, particularly on the Middlesex Turnpike treatment plant?
Well, Phil, in all honesty, we anticipated it to be in the Vinebrook aquifer, those compounds, but we were not anticipating it in the Shawshene River. So we fully expected, and as you know, the plan is to bring the Vinebrook plant offline once the MWRA is up, but being noticed on that, and again, PFAS is commonly found in firefighting foam that they use at airports. So if you think of our proximity to Hanscom, probably a likely cause of that. So that was definitely a shock. We weren't anticipating have to address it, but it's in the water, and you know we've been working full speed ahead to make the water safe since then. We were able to design a solution. This past September, town meeting funded that solution, and the approval process for that with town boards and committees is ongoing, and we're well along in that, and we're ready to get started on that and mitigate that issue.
You sent me a bunch of papers, studies and whatnot on the state decision, and in reading it, there was no definitive negative reaction from a health standpoint from PFAS, none that was directly attributable to this. Yet the state made this decision, and apparently it's been in the water supply statewide for many, many years. So if there was no attributable measure of illness as a result, why did the state make this arbitrary decision, and was there pushback from the member communities who are now going to cost several $1 billion, apparently, it looks like, from a transition standpoint?
You know, the DEP has been very reasonable with the town over the years, given the types of problems we've had with our water supply.
Many.
They've worked with us quite a bit. I'll never understand the process by which they all of a sudden decide that you're going to start testing for this, and then you're on the hook the next day to remediate the problem. As you pointed out, it's a problem that's impacted a multitude of communities here in Massachusetts, and again, it's required to be repaired, and we're all in favor of that. But it's clearly a new mandate that's costing communities in the state a lot of money to resolve. And as you pointed out, the water is very clean according to federal drinking water standards. So I think we all want the water to be as pristine as possible. But yeah, there's certainly an element of, why do we have to be, different from the federal regulations? And again, it's been in the water all the time. They believe that it could cause somebody a problem drinking it over a long period of time. It's not a short-term thing where if you drink the water, someone's going to get ill due to it. But it's unfortunately, they're a regulatory agency and we're bound to comply. And again, we're been working feverishly to get this resolved on behalf of the residents since we were alerted to it.
Well, we'll talk about the cost in a moment, but what this seems to be trending towards, particularly for the high population areas, the dense population areas, that we're trending towards a monolithic water supply, all relying on Quabbin. Does this raise any red flags for you in the event of a major break in the line in the, what do you call that?
That aqueduct?
Yeah, the aqueduct. Go back to Roman times, right? The aqueduct. This aqueduct is going to be essentially providing water for 3 or 4 million people. What is the state doing to mitigate that potential?
Well, we had actually a lot of discussion about this, Phil, because we asked ourselves, we're going to invest in the Mill Pond treatment plant, $15 million to remediate PFAS. We want to have that redundant water supply. The Mill Pond plant is still state-of-the-art. It's actually a really good water source for us, and it's relatively inexpensive water for us to make. And as you may know, it wasn't 10 years ago where the MWRA did have a failure, and they had boil water for their massive amount of constituents that they service, and that aqueduct or one of their major lines failed. So that's why we feel it's so important for us to have the redundancy, the mill pond to fall back on. It's not just that our water supply could fail, that water supply could fail also. And again, with mill pond being state of the art, but it was a difficult decision. Should we go all MWRA?
Right. Frank Monaco brought up that point. I was in the redundancy favor, but then looking at the cost of the mitigation at Mill Pond, it was a consideration to take them both offline. Yeah,
we felt that there was value in continuing the Mill Pond. Again, we totally renovated that place less than 20 years ago, so it is considered state of the art. It makes good water, so we thought that there was definitely some value in maintaining that plant into the future.
Now it's $15 million. What is the mitigation process? I mean, it's a new building, and what exactly is the process to take this out of there?
It's a massive filters. They work with carbon. I'm getting a little bit outside of my expertise range, but the carbon filters out the PFAS out of the water. Very smartly, the actual storage building is being built a little bit larger. In the event that we have to add another filter going forward, or to allow us to add in additional treatment if necessary in the future. So they're very large filters. Everybody in the country is trying to get their hands on them now.
Well, that's the next question is supply chain issues. I know that you presented at town meeting, John Sanchez did as well, that we should get the ball rolling here so we could get at the front of the line. What is the time frame in which these things will be delivered?
I believe it was a 2-year time frame. We've already put the filters in on order yet, even prior to constructing the building, just to sort of try to account for that as much as we could. The fact that we were going to have to wait on these filters, so we bid the job a little bit differently so that we could do that part separate, so we could get the ball rolling on the filters. And while the project's in process of being approved and built. So we're hopeful that by the time the construction's done, the filters will be ready to come in.
Okay, so redundancy will be available to us in the event of a major failure.
Absolutely.
Now, one last question on water, and that would be the Shawsheen, the health of the Shawsheen. We went through a drought period, pretty substantial, 3 or 4 years ago. I think over the last 2 years it's been mitigated. What is the quality of the source? Who's drawing it? Are we going to face potential failure of delivery at some point in time in the future?
I believe so. I think it's definitely under stress. As you probably know, during the spring, it flows pretty pretty well, spring and fall, and then it sort of slows down quite a bit in the summertime, so that is a concern. As you know, Mill Pond is a man-made reservoir, so you know, we can sort of mitigate that by filling it up in advance, you know, drawing water from it while it's still flowing freely, but there certainly are plenty of months during the summer when water's not available from that source. So if we haven't already pulled it into the reservoir, it'd be difficult
And it
to
falls
access
below
it.
our intake pipe, I guess.
Correct.
You have a level. Now let's go on to COVID. That's what's made 2021 a miserable year, amongst other things, financial issues. Let's talk about the budget in general. You made some cuts in anticipation of loss of revenue. What are the three sources of revenue for the town of Burlington, tax revenue?
We have tax revenue, we also have state revenue, and then we have what's called local receipts, which is sort of the bucket where everything else goes into. That would be your motor vehicle excise, your meals tax, your hotel tax, water rates, and things of that nature.
So what was most impacted was local receipts.
Absolutely.
And that was down how much? I know you talked about possibly 8 to 10 million at one point in time over the course of 2021.
Yeah, I think it was, you know, I think ultimately it was more like 4 million because we budget conservatively. So there was a period where we didn't really take a hit because it was, you know, money that would ultimately be in our free cash. So we budget very conservatively, but we did take a substantial hit, particularly with the hotel tax. Meals tax has started to bounce back pretty rapidly. People love to eat, and I think with the addition of the outside dining spaces, that some of the restaurants did pretty well despite it being a difficult year. But the hotel tax was really decimated, and you know, if you were to ask me what's been impacted most significantly in our commercial areas, it's been our hotels.
Now, we went through relatively unscathed. I think in September you were able to put back those cut funds as a result of federal aid. What was that acronym? Was it PIP, or what was the federal funds acronym that gave the cities and towns monies?
ARPA. Well,
ARPA,
the first set
okay.
was CARES funds, and that was more to address the specifics of the pandemic, the public health aspect of it. The ARPA has a little bit more flexibility along with it. We've been told that we're eligible for about $8.3 million of ARPA. We're being very cautious in how we spent it. So the design money for the PFAS solution was the first thing that went out of there. It's widely available to be used for water, sewer, and cable infrastructure. So that was a good thing for us given the water problems that we've had. But aside from that, all we've used is $500,000 in this current year's budget to replace revenue. So we feel as though that money's available to assist the Board of Health with any additional funding that they need, depending upon what happens with this pandemic. But it's also there. We're going to have some funding there, and we'll have some decisions to make in the upcoming years. Because
Okay, so you've spread that money over the next 4 years to address these various other
yeah, we'll have it
financial-
available to make decisions. And again, in the back of my mind, with PFAS being an unexpected expense, whatever we don't need to address the pandemic or address the revenue loss of the town, we'll be able to use for a water project because we have plenty of water projects to use. But between now and then, we'll have the opportunity to have those funds available if we need them.
Okay. And relating to virtually unscathed financially in terms of our financial condition going into the pandemic was AAA rated, right? So give us the numbers. We went in with free cash. We went in with OPEB, several stabilization. Tell us what those conditions are going in and where we stay today, December.
Well, you know, we work really hard at being fiscally conservative here. So despite the fact that we have really an outstanding situation with tax revenue, we're very frugal about how we use that. So we're in a good position heading into the pandemic. I believe we had about 10 million in stabilization. At the time, we had 13 million in free cash, of which we chose at the time to be very judicious in how we used it so that it would carry forward to the following year. And I believe we have about 10 million in our OPEB funding at this point. So the major difference between now and then, we made another deposited into the OPEB trust fund this past May.
Which we had skipped last year. Right?
Yep, we had held off on to see how, and we ultimately made. But the biggest thing that popped for us this year was the free cash came back at $18 million. And again, that's a reflection on the fact that we did not spend as much, just knowing that the future was uncertain.
Cut down warrant articles basically in half.
Yep, we cut down on warrant articles, we cut down on capital spending for a year just to sort of see how things went. And, you know, one thing that was lost from the pandemic is a lot of budget money had gone unspent. We can't do services if we can't bring the people in. So, you know, the school department had some excess fundings that was returned and became part of that 18 million. The town always has excess funding from the budget that goes back into the free cash. So
from all the departments,
from
generally
every
speaking.
single department,
Right.
every single line. So, you know, we'll have some good decisions to make on the $18 million. It's an extraordinary number. Again, it's a reflection of the fact that we're unable to sort of perform as a town and give out the services that we had in the past. So some of that money's gone unspent. But we're going to be in a real good spot moving forward to try to, you know, blessed to try to decide what the best use of those funds is.
Okay, you set the tax rate, the board set the tax rate, and it was based on commercial values and residential values, which have soared. On the January 2021 assessment, and I think we came in at the average home was at 5.68%, I think was the rise.
Yeah, approximately 5%.
Okay, so now, how do you view the potential cultural shift as it relates to commercial values coming into the next values, these January values of 2022? Do you see it as a potential problem, a reduction in commercial values as a result of people working from home? We still see a lot of empty parking lots. We still see a lot of empty buildings. Whether or not that's permanent or not, we don't know. All the leases haven't rolled off, which is not likely to happen in the next 1 to even 5 years. The mall has got any number of retail operations that have closed. The Disney store, I think, was one that was shocking to me, that a major retailer of high-end, virtually, you know, no competition, and apparently they couldn't make it at the mall from a profit standpoint. So what do you anticipate going forward? Is this a problem? Are we going to recover from this type of a cultural shift?
I think it's a little bit too soon to say, but we were surprised at what did happen with the office market over the past year. I mean, I think we're all anticipating disaster. I think the worst case scenario was that some companies right-sized. So if they had extra space, they sort of shrunk themselves a little bit. But what we did see was there was very strong demand in the office market. Some companies actually wanted more space for the purpose of spreading their employees out. You know, just
moving out of Boston, perhaps. They might
moving
be a
out of
bigger problem
Boston.
for
There's
them.
some companies that want to, you know, set up different outposts in the suburbs. We don't think that the traditional office is going away. I think it's going to be different, where everybody doesn't have an assigned space. They're going to be sort of like temporary spaces where you come in, there's an empty cube, you know, you work with your team, and then, you know, you might not come in for 2 days. But we don't feel as though office work is going away. I think that the companies have told us that they sort of have lost out on that collaboration that comes at the so-called water cooler.
Particularly for younger people.
Yeah, and things of that nature, where the camaraderie and teamwork from people and ideas that come from people working in the same space and bouncing stuff off each other, they think is very important. And
Now, you've anticipated this prior to this in terms of a change of direction in Burlington's commercial space by pursuing biotech. First of all, is this, you know, a lot of cats chasing one mouse because, you know, Waltham is doing it, Lexington's doing it. Everybody seems to be focusing on biotech. Is this a panacea, or is this something that we can rapidly compete in?
Based upon the amount of space that they say these biotech firms are looking for is extraordinary. Do I think that everybody's going to win in the biotech race? Probably not. I do think that we're well positioned because of everything else that the town created in our business district. The amenities, the restaurants, the retail, all supports each other. So I think that we're in as good a spot as any to attract some of this pent-up demand. But as you pointed out, it's every single community is jumping into this lab game, and every development in the city of Boston, no matter what neighborhood it's in, is including the lab component. So it's definitely going to be fierce competition. But I do believe that we're in a good position to grab some of it due to all the other great work that has been done, by our land use boards and planning out the town.
Right. Now, the town has rather a dubious history relative to technology as it relates to water in particular and the impact that it's had on it. And now we also have the specter of Wuhan and the mistakes that allegedly have been made there. How comfortable are you that from a regulatory standpoint, whatever we're bringing in here in terms of biotech research and labs and things of that sort, that the resident is protected from that kind of an event?
I feel very strongly that the residents are very well protected. These are very highly regulated industries, and even if they weren't, we have a Board of Health that is just absolutely top notch. And every single one of these companies has to go before the Board of Health to talk about the safety of their lab. They're inspected, and typically, as I mentioned, they're very highly regulated by other agencies to begin with. So these are very, very clean. These are not old-fashioned labs that, I think many of us were concerned. I think there was a time 15, 20 years ago where there was talk about different levels of labs, and the town didn't really want anything that was too borderline at the time, right? And, we've certainly learned a lot about it since then. And our Board of Health, and we have extremely competent professionals working for us, as well as we're blessed to have elected officials that are really, in those industries and very, very deeply involved in it. And I can honestly say that with the Board of Health looking over these things, if I was a resident, I would not be concerned at all.
Now, another thing that we've pursued aggressively, and to some people too aggressively, is liquor licenses. The mall in particular recognizes the failure of retail over the nation in bricks and mortars, so they've made a transition dramatically into food and liquor. Are we reaching a point of diminishing returns in terms of local receipts with the number of restaurants that we have? I mean, we've already had some pretty high profile failures in the restaurant business. Are we vulnerable during the next economic downturn to seeing restaurant failures, which restaurants, I think 40% of them fail within the first 5 years, one of the most risky business ventures in American business?
Well, this is something we've been talking about for years, is where is the saturation point for us on restaurants? I think there would be a point of time where meals tax would sort of stay relatively stable, and that would be an indication to us that, hey, we're not really generating new meals tax, they're just cannibalizing each other in terms of business. We haven't hit that point yet, which is really surprising. And again, as you pointed out, the restaurant business just in its own nature is a very risky business, and even outstanding restaurants go out of business sometimes. And I think given the amount of options and the amount of outstanding restaurants, I think the failures have been, few and far between. I mean, I think, we probably talk about Del Frisco's.
Right.
I'm not sure if that was necessarily a failure or a business decision to try to do something else. I don't necessarily know that it was a failure, other than maybe a corporate decision. But yeah, certainly it's something we worry about. What is the saturation point on restaurants, and when do they stop generating new economic activity and just sort of start stealing from each other on diners?
It's been successfully executed on one end of town, but part of the town center plan over the last couple of years was that we would get mom and pop type of restaurants in town with liquor licenses that had been designated for that area. Yet that hasn't seemed to pan out yet. What do you think is the barrier to success there?
Well, I think one of the barriers is the fact that we have such a wide variety within the commercial sector. There's a lot of competition in town. You know as well as I know that it's really two separate towns here, the residential portion and the business portion, but I have to imagine that there's some hesitancy for somebody to want to challenge all the big players we have in town.
Particularly with a 40 or 50 seat.
Yeah, particularly with a smaller place in the center. I have a great hope that we're going to be able to get a great family, Burlington hometown restaurant someplace in the center at some point.
Or even on the Duffy property, which remains for the most part still 75 or 80% vacant.
Yeah, I have a lot of hope that we'll be able to start to generate. I know we're putting more focus on our town center now. We got some wonderful businesses down there, and as our economic development director likes to point out all the time, it has everything that you would want in a town center. We got the shoe guy, the ice cream place, the coffee shop.
Yeah.
We have it all down there, and it's just how do we make it a more inviting place for residents to want to come down and spend time.
The pop-up park she put together seemed to be a smashing success.
Yeah, and that's all trial and error. I mean, that could have been a smashing failure, but we're going to keep trying different concepts in different areas of the center and just sort of see what works. And we're not going to give up. We feel as though it has great potential, the town center, and we feel as though we've only scratched the surface of how great it could be.
Okay, 2021 was a big year for construction. The DPW barn or the maintenance barn, no, rec and maintenance barn is opened.
Yep.
DPW barn is under construction. How did that first project go? You cut the ribbon. Any punch list necessary on that building? Any failures? And how is the new barn working out? Its construction.
Minor punch list as with any construction project, but overall we're thrilled with the facility. As you know, you've probably visited both the rec maintenance facility and the DPW facility, and they were not up to our standards. So it's a long time coming, and we're very happy to be able to put these hardworking employees in state-of-the-art facilities to just make it even easier for them to do their jobs and provide the services to the residents. And the new part of the building is coming along quite nicely now, as you can tell by driving by.
I was on the board in '83, and at that time we were promising new employees that at some point in time there'd be a new building.
Oh.
Little did we know that it would be
40 years
later.
I mean, that's pretty quick in government terms. That's
all right. I got one last question. Selectman Tigas brought up the issue of the police department. That building that they're in was built in 1897. You're going to have a couple of abandoned property decisions to make, one at Overlook Park and one on the Middlesex Turnpike treatment plant. Where is the possibility of study of a new police department going? And is either of those locations possible?
We'd like to keep it where it is, centralized in the center of town. Obviously, a lot's going to depend upon whether that site is suitable size-wise for a modern police station. But Overlook Park, the opportunity there, we will keep some of the garages in place for storage for municipal operations, but it's a beautiful piece of property there, so it's the town will have some great decisions to be made on it. If you've ever taken a walk up on the Overlook Park area, beautiful up on the hill, wooded area, so there's a lot of potential there. I don't necessarily see it as a site for a police station, obviously, because it's a little bit too deep in a residential neighborhood. But another opportunity could potentially be the Vinebrook plant. There's actually quite a decent amount of upland on that site, and
Parking wouldn't be a problem.
that might work for some type of municipal operation when we're able to discontinue the plant.
Well, the difference between the fire department and the police department is the fire department is centrally located. Police department patrols sectors, and if it were located down there, it would be closest to the primary areas that crime is being committed.
Yeah, I know if the law enforcement folks prefer to be in the center if possible.
Don't we all? I know the town administrator does too. He prefers to be there. Okay, Paul, again, thanks for your time. Glad to see you're up and about and back in the saddle. Thanks for your time as always.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Phil.
Thank you for joining us. My guest today has been Town Administrator Paul Sagarino. We're glad to have him back. This has been BNEWS Special Report 2021 Year in Review, Year to Forget. Thank you for joining us.